You're tuned into the Zelos podcast. I'm your host, Rocky Snyder. This week I've got Eric Cressy in the house, Director of Player Performance for the New York Yankees. But before we get underway, I've got this continuing education workshop happening November 3rd in Capitola, California. Posture-based soft tissue mobilization. For more information, you can go to my website, rockysnyder.com. We've got online courses as well that are for CEUs, for chiropractors, athletic trainers, physical therapists, personal trainers, and strength coaches. If you're looking for even more knowledge, consider Setanta College for a Master's of Science in Applied Sports Biomechanics and Movement Science. They've got a program for Applied Sport and Exercise Psychology as well. Their other two tracks are Performance Coaching and Sports Injuries and Return to Performance Management. Go to setantacollege.com, enter RS10 for 10% off your tuition today. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button before you start listening, and might as well join us on Instagram. Follow me at Rocky_Snyder, and check out my book, Return to Center, Strength Training to Realign the Body, Recover from Pain, and Achieve Optimal Performance. Okay, on to the conversation. Eric, first of all, thanks for coming on Zealous. I know your plate is super full, but you made time for me, so I'm very grateful.
My pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
Now, again, another Northeaster, another New Englander. You grew up on the coast of Maine in Kennebunk. I've actually surfed in Kennebunk, and good beach break. I don't know if I wouldn't imagine that you grew up surfing because it's just not one of those sports you think of when you think of Maine. But any chance you're a surfer?
I was actually woefully unprepared with respect to all things Maine sports. I didn't ski. I didn't surf. I think I kind of took the beach and the mountains for granted. But no, I was a soccer and a tennis player most of all. So nothing that really relied heavily on Maine's beautiful natural resources.
It is vacation land, just like the license plate says. But you got the heck out of Dodge. You're down in Massachusetts. You're in Florida. You're in New York. Give us a little rundown I can't imagine that any of the listening audience doesn't know who you are, but in the event that there's maybe somebody that's just come back from the Catskills after 20 years, give me a little rundown, superhero origin story, how you started out, how you got with the Yankees and Cressy Performance and all that.
Yeah, for sure. So, like you implied, I grew up in Southern Maine. Like many folks who wind up in this industry, I was a fantastically mediocre athlete that in hindsight, I could have been maybe a little bit better. Maybe my upside was probably a Division II athlete with good training and all that. But the long and short of it is I had some shoulder problems as a aspiring tennis player, and basically, kind of found this industry both through learning to rehabilitate that shoulder and then also just kind of dealing with some health, problems related to kind of like exercise addiction, that side of things when I was 18, and really kind of turned a corner when I first went off to school thinking I was going to be an accountant. So spent 2 years at Babson College, which is a business school. And, over the course of that time, rehabbing a shoulder, getting my body weight where it needs to be, kind of fell in love with the gym and transferred all my management credits to the University of New England and did a double major in exercise science and sports and fitness management. And then went on to grad school at the University of Connecticut, where we were doing basically cool stuff relating to exercise endocrinology. And my grad assistantship was funded by the U.S. Army and kind of a study to look at potential countermeasures to prevent stress fractures in female basic training recruits. When I went to grad school, I really didn't know what I wanted to do in this industry. I was lucky when I first got there. I kind of got my foot in the door with some of the varsity strength and conditioning and just fell in love with it. Had some good mentors there that kind of let me spread my wings and learn and, fail without consequences for lack of a better way of looking at it. And left grad school. And it just so happened some of the first athletes I started working with were baseball players. And with my own history with, shoulder problems, I'd always been a big baseball fan. Just kind of quickly realized it was a very underserved population, and we were able to get some really good results early on with high school kids. And before those high school guys become college guys become pro guys. They refer teammates, they have agents, they have coaches that become vouchers for your program. So we opened our first facility in Boston in 2007. Probably to this day 80+% of our clients are baseball players. That brand grew pretty dramatically and started to realize that there was a better play for like a nationwide presence. So we opened a second location in Jupiter, now Palm Beach Gardens, Florida. We deal with athletes from all 30 major league organizations, MVPs, Cy Young Award winners, you name it. And then the Yankees approached me at the end of 2019 about getting involved. So my official title at the Yankees is Director of Player Health and Performance. So basically, I oversee strength and conditioning and nutrition for the organization, and everything from staffing to staff education to kind of having a visionary role with respect to how we program, how we assess, do all those different things. And then I have a lot of kind of like cross appointments with amateur scouting, pro scouting, a lot of collaboration with our performance science department, our sports medicine department. So I'm lucky. I think a lot of people, you probably can speak to this, is like when you're a small business owner, you're the entrepreneur, you kind of always have to make the final decision. And there are times when it can be a little bit challenging because people necessarily, they're not necessarily pushing you. And one of the nice things about being the Yankees is I really get as many opportunities as I want to be the dumbest guy in a room. And that's something I crave for a lot of time. So it's been a perfect complement to what I do in the private sector. And I'm very blessed to do some cool stuff on a daily basis.
Right on. I love it. I mean, well, how I was first turned on to you was I had a trainer that was kind of my right hand guy at my facility here, Joey Wolf.
It
And
was
Joey
great.
made it up into the
Yeah.
minors. I'm sure you're familiar with
Yeah.
his name. And man, he just kept on saying Eric Cressy this, Eric Cressy that. He later broke off and he's got a great facility
Santa
on the
Cruz.
other
Yeah.
side of town.
Yeah.
Yep, right in Santa
Yeah.
Cruz. And Joe's still remains to this day a really good friend of mine, solid individual.
Yeah.
But I started checking it out, and man, I find your fingerprints on the end of your fingers must be worn off with the amount of typing you've done. Brother, you've got over 500 publications, at least 4 published books. Your research journals have appeared, or research publishes have appeared in journals all over the place. Like it felt like back in 2006, 2007, leading up into that point, maybe it was a few years after that, but man, you were on a writing frenzy,
Yeah.
like so much
Yeah.
information coming out that I was that one of the things that if you were to give advice to people in our industry, professionals coming up, just to write your tail feathers off.
It can work for some people. I think my mom may have led the witness a little bit. So my mom taught high school English, so I was around reading. It came a little bit more naturally to me. If I'm being honest, I've spoken about this publicly before. I've done a ton of presentations and spoken all over the world and stuff. I am not by any stretch of the imagination like a gifted public speaker. Like I actually really struggle with it. I'm a guy, my brain gets going really, really fast, and you're trying to get your mouth to keep up with it. Writing for me was always a way to organize my thoughts better. Like I said, I was around it a lot. I was fortunate to have some really good teachers in high school who challenged me to write at a higher level. And I always look back in senior year, AP English was like the best thing I could have possibly imagined. Actually, my teacher from that year actually did the eulogy at my grandmother's funeral not too long ago. So we still stay in touch and talk about how impactful that was. But I look back, and writing is just, it's way to be more succinct. It makes you a better coach because nobody wants to read verbal diarrhea, right? They don't want to read 10 paragraphs when they can read 2. And what it did was it actually taught me how to organize my thoughts better. It made me a better coach. It made me a better presenter, all those things. So, for some people, I think it can be really, really helpful. Because for me, it was an avenue through which I could improve on those other means. But, I look back, and what it really did for, I think, our business was we always talk about, like, if folks come in to train with you, right? New customer that is interested in improving their fitness with you, sometimes they're gonna bump into one of your current clients at the grocery store, and they're gonna be like, "Oh, your knee doesn't hurt anymore because I was working out with Rocky. He made me feel amazing." So it's one point of way for them to perceive your expertise. Then maybe it's a newspaper article about you. Maybe it's something you wrote. Maybe it's that they bumped into somebody who saw you speak on the Perform Better tour. Oh, you live in Santa Cruz, like Rocky's great. You should check out his classes. Like, so what I think we need to do in the industry is we need to give people an opportunity to perceive our expertise, not just more often, but through a variety of mediums, right? Like, we're old, we're on Facebook, like 22-year-olds aren't, they're on TikTok, they're on Instagram, whatever it is. So I think what writing did for me early on was, particularly before kind of the era of social media, it gave people an opportunity to perceive my expertise more
Very much.
easily. And I think
Yeah.
the other thing that's different now, like if you go out and get exposed to a marketing message, we're kind of desensitized to it because our phone's always attached to us. And there's so many different avenues through which people can bombard us. I think it takes a lot more of those exposures before people make a, purchase decision to join your gym or to hire you for whatever. So I think early on it was a magnifier because there were just fewer people doing it. There were fewer distractions in the world. Like when I started writing, I didn't own a cell phone. Like it was like dial-up internet probably at that point. So I really was lucky. There's a little bit of first mover advantage, I think, where I really started writing regularly around 2000, 2001. Started my newsletter in '03. And I look back, I mean, I have people that have been reading my stuff for like 21 years now. And, to the point that like, if I go on vacation, I don't publish a newsletter for like 5 days, I'll have people that email and are like, are you okay? Like, I haven't heard from you. So there's a little bit of like feeding the monster that goes with it, but I'm very appreciative and, kind of humbled by the fact that people have followed my career like that. And, I like to think that I've delivered value. I certainly hope so. But that's what you always try to do. If you want to build a business, solve a problem. And I think people were just craving information, and that was an avenue back in those days where you could get it.
Well, you're definitely very humble because the one thing that stood out with me when I was starting to be exposed to you and your work and your position was in fact how you were positioning yourself as a perceived authority. Not that you were necessarily trying to get to a certain status, but by virtue of your information, your research, your knowledge, coupled with the fact that you here even said that, on a glorious day, I might be a D2 athlete. Like you were not in the majors. You didn't make it
Yeah.
up into the minor rank and struggle and try and get to the big show and then decide to do this instead.
Mhm.
No, this came from basically the ground up
Yeah.
of be having a passion and just pursuing information and knowledge and just disseminating everything you got and then reform it in a way that was digestible for people, that was starting to make sense, that was an overused phrase, cutting edge, but the first and the forefront of thinking about things differently. And what I mean by that is that okay, we can go back to 2001, 2002. And yeah, I didn't have a cell phone. I was
Mhm.
just about to get one. I was doing a tremendous amount of
Mhm.
writing. First book was self published. And then you had to go and you had to sell the idea to
Yeah.
some publishing group and so on. It wasn't like these were the days that you were really trying to
Yeah.
kind of make a mark and scratch and claw your way to anything you could. But at that time in our industry, compartmentalization, the way of thinking about movement, of being okay, if you've got a rotator cuff issue, the problem is your shoulder. They
Yeah.
didn't look at the kinetic chain. Tom Meyer's anatomy train hadn't really taken hold of anything, and you were already, and I'll say I was in the shadows and just not writing to the degree that you were, we're already looking at the integrative patterning of the
Yeah.
body and how force production being pent up here or not transferring the way that it
Absolutely.
should is going to create a chain reaction through the body
Yeah.
that's going to initiate some type of issue in the tissue, some orthopedic cost somewhere down the line. So that's the thing that I'm like, okay, this guy's got his head on straight and he's saying some things that are probably going to be at that time on the fringe. Did you
Yeah.
feel like you were on the fringe?
I don't think in real time I did. I do think, to some degree I was probably swayed. I came from a small town in Maine, right? And my dad was a school bus distributorship in southern Maine, and like, it wasn't a wildly profitable business. Like there were a lot of times when we were probably on the brink of not making a mortgage payment and things like that. So I think I never got comfortable. I look back and, I had an amazing childhood and, and I was very fortunate to, what is it? Happiness consists not in having great possessions, but in having few wants. Like I didn't really know until I kind of grew up and got out of there that we didn't really have a lot. But I do think I subconsciously never really got comfortable. There is a little bit of a challenge in the industry nowadays where I think a lot of people are just chasing that dopamine response. It's like, hey, be as controversial as you can on social media, set relationships on fire. It won't come back to bite you. I always had that small town feel to me where it's like you took care of each other, like you had good relationships, you didn't speak out of turn. And I think it always gave me a little bit more of a pensive approach. But it's funny. There's a guy named Joe Yeager. Joe does some cool stuff with On Base U, and is real successful trainer with a good baseball following in Illinois. And I actually met him at Perform Better in Chicago years ago. And he came to my presentation, came up, talked at the end of the thing. I answered 4 or 5 of his questions. And what's funny is he just like stops me. We're like 15 minutes in. He said, "Man, I thought you were going to be an a-hole." Like I was convinced you were going to be a jerk. Like we walked, like my wife was with us. We were walking all the way back to the hotel, and he's like, people just assume because you're on that stage or you've been put on a pedestal, I guess, to that degree that you're not going to be approachable. It's like, no, man, rising tide lifts all ships. I want this industry to be better so that we can all get better and deliver better value. And what's funny is Joe's come to like baseball mentorships. Actually got him some batting practice passes when he was on the road just recently. You know, he's become like a longtime consumer and friend. He's actually referred a couple of his players, you know, to us when they've been down in Florida. We have a great relationship to this day. But I always look back, I'm like, man, if I had been short with him, if I hadn't been someone who was approachable, that perception of me, which was not really rooted in anything, you know, might have lingered. So I'm always very, very cognizant of trying to stay humble, particularly because I try to get out of my comfort zone and learn as much as I can. Like, you know, Bill Hartman was just down and he did an in-service for our staff Friday and Saturday this past week, and blew our mind. There were some really, really good things that we can use, A, to refine our approaches, but B, to justify how we got results in the past by accident. Like oh, that's why that worked. We did the right thing, but we didn't necessarily have the true, biomechanical rationale for it at the time. So I try to stay super humble. I try to surround myself with, smart people who, you know, make me look smart because they're delivering a great quality product, but also challenge me to be better. If you just surround yourself with a bunch of yes men, it's never going to work. But I do think there are a lot of folks out there. I mean, I'm sure we could offline list dozens of them, people who, had a good 2 years in the industry and then they set it on fire because they couldn't wait to just leave this, trail of shattered relationships in their wake. And I never wanted to be that guy.
Well, that's good that you mentioned that. I mean, and also you bring up the perform better, and I guess we got to talk about that for a second because we were down in Orlando this year together. You spoke on Friday. I was the cleanup crew on Saturday, but the perform better. I shut down my facility and I take my entire staff down to LA. We drive down 5-6 hours. We get a time to really be close together and talk about things that we don't get to talk about on a daily basis because we're working with clients and we're not focused on one another and sharing those things. Then we get down there and we spend 2.5 days of just digging the vibe, the energy, the knowledge, and all the presenters, like yourself included, are so approachable that it is just, and not to mention the networking, the social night on Friday nights, typically, where you can just go and hang with everybody. There's something, if you've never been to Perform Better Summit, I've been going since 2006 or so. Like when you were starting to present, I think 2007, I was starting. You never came out to the West Coast, at least in the years that I was there. I didn't see you there.
I had Long Beach, I think twice over the years. I got to go back and look at what years, but
so timing wasn't good. But
Yeah.
Perform Better, quite the family, and talk about being the dumbest guy in the room. I love going down there because I get to hang out with you guys and Lee and Gray and Mike Boyle and the rest of them. I'll just be like, okay, I'm just going to soak all this up because you're talking things that I want to know, and it's great. So
it's an amazing value, and I always tell Chris you just don't find that much expertise from a variety of different disciplines in one place.
You don't.
It's and everyone's super approachable. I don't know of any egos on that tour that aren't going to answer your questions and stuff. So they really have done an amazing job. I mean, it's snuck up on me. I think this was 17 years, so it's crazy.
Wow, that's crazy. But we all come from the same background, more or less. I mean, no one walked in here as the expert. So it's something that's for years and years you start learning. And actually, right now, as we're recording this, the Providence Training Summit's going on with Perform Better right now. They've got today and tomorrow finishing up. So if you haven't been to one of the four, then make a point of going 2025. Okay, so I could geek out on biomechanics, shoulder health, I think, and not to put too strong of an opinion on Tommy John surgery, but man, that seems to be the easy out when people don't understand true biomechanics. But that's my opinion. What's your opinion on Tommy John surgery?
I mean, it's quite literally the billion-dollar question. So there's layers to this for sure. No doubt about it. When we talk about biomechanics, this concept of regional interdependence, basically an elbow paying the price because something else in the chain is not doing its job. There are absolutely elements of that are 100% in play. So I'd agree. Like you see a lot of guys that have tons of passive shoulder ER, don't have good active control of it. We see people, who develop a big old valgus carrying angle that don't understand kind of like how the humerus interacts with the lower arm. Like those are absolutely placed. So we can have those discussions, no doubt about it. And I think we do need to have those discussions. The other avenues to this is we are dealing with an increased specialized game. What does that mean? Not just that kids are playing baseball year round. That's my next point, but also the very, very deliberate, selling out for velocity, a much more specialized game at the major league level where, you throw your best pitch more often. Guys are chasing higher velocities in shorter stints versus like the era of guys, living at 91 and then having 95 when they needed it. The pitching velocities at the big level have gone up astronomically year after year after year. It's the number one predictor of elbow injury is high velocity pitching. Okay. So that's why we don't see many guys that are throwing 100 consistently as a starting pitcher. Like they're few and far between, and most of them have had some kind of interventions in that regard. So I do think those are certainly parts of it. Dr. Meister's talked a lot about, designer pitches or sweepers, power changeups, guys who may be throwing pitches that force their elbow to do things that don't align with their natural arm action. All that stuff is 100% on the table, particularly in the major leagues. If we're looking at this, what I'll tell you is like people from other sports, even college baseball folks, they don't understand what pro baseball is. Pro baseball is on another level of crazy. As an
How so?
example, 200 games in 230 days.
That's crazy.
Potentially a new time zone every third day. We had a day coming out of the All-Star break where we played a doubleheader in Houston and then took an overnight flight to Baltimore and played a 6:40 game the next night. We played 3 games in 2 time zones in 24 hours. And one of our players had an elbow injury in the second game. Like there is not much you can do physiologically to work with that. The other thing about baseball that's different, if you play a Tuesday night game and you have a guy that rolls an ankle or gets hit by a pitch or something relatively unpreventable, you have to make a call right after that game because you got to play again in sometimes 20 hours, right? And you've got to know, is that player going to be ready to go the next day? Is he going to be ready to go in 3 days, or is this going to be longer? Because you have to make a roster decision, and the rosters are so cramped that it's hard to play short a man. It's you leave yourself very exposed. Someone else has to cover those at bats, those innings, whatever it is. And so you're always left with these hard decisions. If you're in the NFL, you got 6 days. Like you can send them for a spa day on Monday. And not only that, like sounds terrible to say, you can inject those guys with a lot of painkillers every Sunday morning and nurse them through 4 hours of activity. You can't do that in baseball. Like you can't put Band-Aid on something and get it through it. You can do that in the NBA. You give guys 1 day off and they might get 6 days down. Same thing with the NHL, like long competitive season, but not 162 regular season games. So we played 48 games in 51 days before. And this is, the 162 game season doesn't even take into account spring training,
Yeah.
postseason. It's really hard, and the travel is really challenging. A lot of if you play in the NFL, right, most of the time you're playing 1 or 4 o'clock games. You're leaving and you're getting home before midnight if you're a road team, unless you're the Sunday night game. But even still, you have a guaranteed day off. You play a getaway game on Sunday night baseball, you're not leaving the park till at least midnight. If you got a 3-hour flight plus busing to the plane and stuff, you might get home at 6 and have to play at home that night. So it's a big deal. Night getaway games, the time travel, and then having to go directly to the game. It's unlike any other sport. If you actually look, there was a great article on SB Nation a couple years ago where they talked about how the quality of NBA play had gone down because there was so much roster turnover. Teams were turning over 40% of their roster every year. So it was becoming like playground roll, like pick and rolls and just shoot threes. Like the days of like Ginobili and Duncan and Tony Parker, like those were gone. Like teammates didn't know each other. So the NBA actually made a conscious effort to like have fewer back-to-back games because they wanted teams to actually practice together. So they would play higher quality basketball. Baseball, it's the exact opposite. Like everybody is always back to back. You might play double headers. Name another sport where you play a double header. It doesn't
No.
happen. And even in the college game, they don't get it. They play Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and maybe a midweek game. Occasionally, they might play a double header on a weekend, but 4 games in 7 days is a totally different bear. So you're trying to always think weeks in advance. Anyway, that's the pro level. Like that's talking about like winning games, putting your best foot forward in terms of skill and games that really, really matter, all that stuff. And it's a balancing act between do you pump the brakes now so that you can be healthy later, but then worry about missing the postseason? Do you push now because every game matters? It's really, really hard. You grew up watching AL East games. It's a different world. Like it's a very competitive division. And April games at Yankee Stadium at Fenway Park, they're intense. It's
Yeah.
not like playing, a AL Central game at 1 o'clock with 4,000 people in the stands. So it's very different. Um, that's
Well,
the pro side.
you didn't
Yeah,
even mention the fact that we're talking about multi-million, if not billion-dollar assets that
yeah.
you're trying to,
Mhm.
I'm not going to say manipulate, adjust, assess,
Yeah.
figure out the best possible
Mhm.
outcome, and at
Yeah.
the same time cross your fingers and hope you made the right
Yeah.
decision.
Sometimes their crazy adaptation, their aggressive compensation is what makes them, special. Sometimes what makes you spectacular can also make you susceptible. So you never want to take away somebody's superpower. You want to leverage it as best you can and, mitigate risk. That's the pro side, though. The bigger issue in this conversation is what's happening at the young levels. I'm
Yes.
fortunate where I do a lot in amateur scouting. I do a lot for our draft prep and stuff like that. One of the most eye-opening things is when you see, we have a lot of video assessments on players that, kind of remain. So we follow them for years. So we can see that kid that, was a high school draft eligible guy, say in 2019, right? And, it's arms and legs flying everywhere. He's, 6'3", 170, throwing 88 to 91. And it looks like everything's about to break. Terrible delivery. And then that kid goes to the SEC, right? Gets a good pitching coach, gets good food, gets a good college strength and conditioning experience. He goes to 6'3", 210, gets a bunch stronger. They clean up the delivery. They optimize, his pitch usage. They do a great job with him, and then he blows out. And the reason, very simple, is that kid had a broken elbow all along. The challenge is we're looking at these imaging, and all these guys have calcification on their ligament. They got big old osteophytes. We see guys that sign for millions of dollars who have raging stress reactions in their elbow that they don't even know are there. So the challenge is we have these kids that are chasing velocity, changing crazy high level exposures without foundational work capacity, foundational strength, body awareness, all these things that underpin high level performance. So what we've really, really done is we've flipped the pyramid upside down, right? The
Hmm.
peak of the pyramid is competing at a really, really high level. And it's one of the reasons why we see lower success rates with college kids than excuse me, with high school kids than we do with college kids. Probably even a lower success rate when we see, kids internationally who are signed at 16 or 17 versus 18. The younger we chase high level performance when we should be chasing comprehensive development, the more we pay for in the back end. And what's really interesting is I think we see this a lot, in some of the players that have come from Japan over the years. There's actually some really interesting research that compares Japanese 9 to 12-year-old elbows to American 9 to 12-year-old elbows.
Oh,
And we
yeah.
actually see far more UCL damage on young kids in Japan. And you look at the studies have like 18 hours per week on average baseball training in Japanese kids. The standard deviation was outrageous too. You have kids that are doing
Wow.
like 5 hours a day of baseball training at a young age. That elbow is bound to go. And you hear these stories about guys throwing 700 pitch bullpens and stuff, but they also play on a 7-day rotation, so there's much more time to recover. They play in a culture where it's less accepted to report pain. They also play in a
Mm.
culture where they don't have necessarily the sports medicine resources that we have here. They're in a culture where strength conditioning isn't as accepted. So that the average fastball velocity in Japan is not as high as it is in the US. It's not as velocity crazy. So they're kind of conditioned to going slower for longer. And in many cases, they come to the American game, and instead of being on a 7-day rotation, you go to a 5-day rotation. There's more and more pressure to be really, really good in shorter outings versus like throwing these 140 pitch complete games versus being really good for 95 pitches because they're not going to let you see the third time through the order. So it's a total recalibration, but often American baseball may get blamed for some of these injuries that happen in Japanese pitchers that come over. But a lot of times these were kind of ticking time bombs early
Wow.
on. And that's what we're seeing so much on the amateur side. It's sad to say, but like you're having these conversations. I had it yesterday with a kid that was interested in coming to our facility for a consult. He was like scheduled, and the dad emailed and said, like, hey, we got a little bit of a hiccup. His elbow barked this weekend. We got imaging on it. He's got a moderate partial UCL injury. It's a proximal injury, so it'll probably do well with conservative treatment compared to a distal injury. But right now we're making the decision of, do we PRP it, take 6 weeks off, do rehab, do a gradual return to throwing program. We're 12 weeks in. He wants to get committed to a program because he's a senior, but we also know that longer term, that elbow could go if this conservative doesn't go. Do I have a UCL repair with internal brace? Do I have a full-blown Tommy John? Like, how does it impact so you're creating these dynamics where physiology gets pushed out the window. It's time frames and college commitments and trying to be everything to everyone with travel ball and showcases and stuff like that. And at the end of the day, like guys like us are in the back of the room, like, hey, how about we just develop? Like, how about we work on stuff? We have a really good high school player. Will be a draft prospect this year. He's committed to a big time SEC school. Great kid who's kind of worked out with us since he actually, his older brother worked out with us. So he started with us 13, 14. Like, parents are super meticulous about just like, monitoring the competitive year, taking some time off, not getting crazy. He was 100% healthy, already committed. He threw 17 innings this summer. Like, that's not a lot of workload. That's what the game has created. It's created this like showcase ball, throw an inning, try to blow up the radar gun, wait 6 days and do it again. And we wonder why we're not developing more guys, that can throw 200 innings in the major leagues. Like, you and I both know, like, if you go out and run as fast as you can once a week, first off, you're not going to get faster. Second off, you're going to be a massive injury risk for hamstrings injuries because running fast is actually protective. If we get in a bunch of bouts of, all the preparatory stuff in the 6 days between, before you know it, there's technical benefits that come about. There's tissue resiliency, there's neurological, kind of like wiring that improves. So the amateur game is really, really dysfunctional in the way it's structured right now. People think that, AU basketball or hockey or all these things are bad. Like, yes, but at the end of the day, you go play soccer, 3 games in a weekend or whatever. Average midfielder in a soccer game, as I recall, it's like 2,200 changes of direction in a game, 7 miles they cover. There's so much variability. Baseball, you go and you throw the baseball the exact same all the time. You're going to blow out more UCLs playing baseball than you do ACLs playing soccer. And that's just the way that it is. So I just happen to work in an industry where people literally live on the edge of disaster. We have the biomechanical data to show the stress on the ligament, cadaveric models, like we have so much information, but none of it matters if we don't like take care of stupidity, people making bad decisions in the youth levels.
Well, see, I don't see you sitting back in behind everybody in the room and just meekly raising your hand and going, "Hey, how about we focus on strength, fundamental and foundational strength?" I see you taking people by the shoulders and just trying to shake some sanity into them. So how do you get the point across? I mean, obviously, you've got your podcast, your newsletters, and you're with the Yankees and so on. But is there a movement? Is there a push?
Yeah, 2 things I'll say. First one, I've always been lucky, and I hate using this as an example because not everyone has this at their fingertips. I can go and I can point to guys in our room. This is a Major League Baseball player who did it right when they were 14. They made hard decisions. They were willing to put a baseball down, focus on training, this, that, and the other. Having those guys as examples. I mean, at this point, I think we've got 11 guys that train with us from age 15 who are now in the big leagues. So that's a remarkable long-term athletic development model. And they're all great kids who are like willing to kind of help deliver these messages. So I lean on those guys a lot. And I try to really highlight those, not just in conversation at the facility, but in a more, like public dynamic, just so that those benefits can extend beyond our walls. The second thing I will say that's made me better at is being a dad. So we have twin 9-year-olds and a 5-year-old. They all are into gymnastics. Our oldest by 2 minutes of our twins is incredibly into gymnastics. So like this is for the first time I've gotten thrust into this world. Like, it was really easy to be on the sidelines and tell other people what to do. Like, it's hard. Our 9-year-old goes to 4 3-hour gymnastic practices per week. But what I also know is this is a kid that can't walk across our kitchen without doing a cartwheel or like a back walkover or having me hold her hands for a handstanding. Like she does it all the time. She loves it. She like she's like doing backflips off her bed as we're trying to like get her to go to sleep. It's what she lives for. But you know what I'm willing to do? Like, don't get me wrong, we can sell out for it. It's gymnastics season. But when the new year comes around, it's softball. Like I'll be the bad guy if it means she's missing gymnastics practice to go to softball. I'm willing to make that sacrifice to have that hard conversation, even if it means we're still paying for gymnastics. I know that the benefits of building a rich foundation are so pronounced that I'm willing to die on that hill. And so you have to be willing to do so. Usually in baseball, it's be willing to step away in the fall, which is kind of what we're doing for softball. But I'm using a couple examples, but like we have a daughter that loves dance. They didn't like tennis. They love to swim in the pool. Like we're feeling out what's good for them. It doesn't matter what I want for them, but as a parent, we both know it's your job to set the guardrails. Like you want them to let their freak flag fly and be unique, but hey, you're not having candy for dinner. It's off the table. So this is one of those guardrails that I'm willing to set.
That's good. Yeah. For me, it was soccer with my
Yeah.
kids. It could have been all year round, fall, of course, then winter indoor soccer, spring
Yeah.
is outdoors, and then summer is beach soccer and soft
Yeah.
sand. I'm like, man, okay, no, we're not. If you want to go every now and then, one game,
Mhm.
uh, maybe every couple of weeks to do indoor just to play inside a hockey rink, then yeah, have at it. That'll be
Yeah.
kind of fun. Get your moving and grooving and get out of the house. But summertime, no, that's not happening. We're not year-round athletes
Yeah. And
because it's
it's
just
tough.
not it's
And
burnout,
yeah.
injury. I mean, you could go on and on, right, Eric?
Yeah. It's tough. Even just what it pushes out, how hard is it to have a family vacation when you have year-round soccer players? Like to even
Sincerely.
have, I mean, we have a daughter at gymnastics, at least one every day, Monday through Saturday. Even our 5-year-old, she's there Wednesday, Saturdays. One of our 9-year-olds is Tuesdays and Thursdays. The other one's Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. Like our schedule is like a game of Jenga. Like I feel like a
Oh, you're
chauffeur
a
on top of
sap. That's
our
what you are.
others.
You're
But
a
but
sugar daddy. That
but
is
you think
awesome.
about what happens though. How many family dinners are you getting in there? Maybe
No, that's
Sunday
just
night if
it.
you're lucky, right? So there are a lot of things that get really pushed out, and then you start talking about, oh, they've got to travel for events and stuff like that. I'm like, you know what? I would love to think that every kid in our facility is going to go make $100 million playing professional baseball. The reality is that you're going to have one high school kid a year that makes a viable income playing professional baseball. Even the guys that make it, it's really darn hard to get 5 or 6 years in the big leagues to justify all the opportunity cost of like spending 5 years in the minor leagues and not leveraging your college degree and all that stuff. Like, there's baseball ends for everybody. Very rarely do they get the Mariano Rivera, Derek Jeter like farewell tour. Usually it ends on someone else's terms. So I'm very, very mindful that youth sports for me, one, it's about creating a positive lifelong association with exercise. Same thing that I've tried to create where our daughters have come to the gym and hung out with mommy and daddy. Way more is caught than taught. I loved it when our 3-year-olds were pulling each other on the sled and swinging from the TRX stands because now they come in and they literally do mommy's workouts with her. So that for me is really, really important. And then the second thing, it's character building. It's understanding how to be part of a team. It's understanding how to structure things, to set goals, to get to them. Like I have no delusions of my daughters winning gold medals, but even if they walk away having a healthy, safe experience and made a lot of good friends and learned a lot about themselves, like we checked all the important boxes for me.
That's cool. Now, with that, with Cressy Performance, your two facilities, you've got the youth athletes in there as well as minor league and major league professionals there. But and you've got a tremendous team, as I understand, as I see it through the website. Even you've got medical professionals. I'm curious about the mind game, the
Yeah.
mental performance. Do you have? Do they have to
Yeah.
go through something like that? All your athletes?
Yeah. That's uncharted territories. I'm
It is,
fortunate.
yeah.
We have in my Yankees role, we have an amazing mental skills department. And certainly you have to have, folks that, the clinical dynamics, folks that may be dealing with more significant issues versus the ones that are more like, hey, I can't shake this bat at bat I had. Those are different dynamics. And I think even the people in those realms will understand when to refer out and things like that. So we don't have folks underneath our umbrella, but we certainly have a trusted network of professionals that we refer out. But you know what? Like you've done this a long time too. Like you can't be a trainer, strength and conditioning coach unless you got a little accidental psychologist in you. Like
Sure.
I remember the first time I had a big league guy that walked in with tears in his eyes and said, I'm getting a divorce. Like, you better change the plan for that workout, or, maybe you let him sell out for the dream and blow off some aggression or something like that. Like that's a hard day. You don't really have any textbook that's going to teach you how to manage that side of things. So we train people, not programs. So I do think you have to have those soft skills to be able to handle just about anything that comes your way. Like, I don't know how many times you've done it, but there are probably some times when people come in and they're beating themselves up, and it's like, maybe you need to go surf today instead of being in the gym. Like, it happens once a year, but there's times.
Oh yeah, no, we have that has happened, and and I'm okay with leaving the gym and locking up
Yeah,
and joining them out there too.
yeah,
So, but what about the parents? Because you brought
yeah,
that up, and I'm curious. You have your own orientation with the athletes, and you have your interview and assessment process.
yeah,
But do you have anything like a, hey, this is going to be parents' night or parents' workshop, and
yeah.
here are the things that really concern us, and you need to be aware of this, such as the year-round athlete, the
Yeah.
velocity pursuit, and so on.
Yep.
Do you do anything like that, or is it more
Yeah.
along the lines of like podcasts and newsletters?
No, I mean, certainly the podcast has been very popular. I don't think I ever appreciated when I started how much of it would be parents and kids listening on the way to or from practice or games. So I love that side of it. And it's been not just a good lead generator, but almost like a reaffirmation of our expertise in the baseball niche. But what I would say is, beyond that, we host an event every fall at both of our facilities called the Night with the Pros. And what it is, it's a roundtable discussion. I kind of MC it, and we'll always have like an orthopedic surgeon on it. We'll have someone with a nutrition background. We'll have one or two of our coaches. We'll have several major league players. Actually, we had last year Zach Geloff, the Oakland A's second baseman, who was American League Rookie of the Month, I think, in August last year. Zach's been with us since he was 16. Went to the University of Virginia, so he was on it. But his dad also came on it, which was awesome because he had two kids that were both drafted in the top 60 picks, both out of UVA. So Adam was like a great resource, just talking about like, here were the non-negotiables. Like, he talked about, Zach went to play baseball at University of Virginia, but he always looks back and says, making that free throw in basketball with a packed gym in a clutch moment was so big for him. They were both soccer players on a really good nationally ranked soccer program. Like, he emphasized multi-sport participation, finding avenues to compete across disciplines. So that is a really good event. We'll get 120, 130 people that come for it, and really good chance to deliver some of those. The other thing I would just say is, when I do evaluations, I have conversations with these folks. I held back way less than I used to. I used to be very, very casual, and what I've come to realize is that you have to be extremely direct with parents who think they know this. And then the truth is, like, you go through this college recruiting program process like once, maybe twice. There's no like playbook. Kids don't come with an instruction manual. Certainly, like when you come to navigate youth sports. So I'm extremely direct. It's easier to be extremely direct now that I have my own children. If this was my child, here's what I would do.
Mm-hmm.
And I put it right on them. So I try not to beat around the bush. My wife would give me a hard time. She says I'm not direct. In those moments, I'm extremely direct. And I think it served us really, really well. Particularly, we're talking about injured athletes. Like, we had a kid who came in, actually with a spondy, a stress fracture in his back. I've seen 250 of these since 2006. Like, it's like washing the dishes. It's like really, really easily mundane in terms of how to do it, but it doesn't work if a kid is feeling good 2 weeks in and decides to go out and hit as much as he can and sets himself back. So I lock it in. We make eye contact, and I tell them exactly how the next 8 to 16 weeks are going to be, how often they're going to get rescanned, what we're going to do, why they're going to make sure they're in physical therapy instead of just sitting in a back brace. Like, you just got to have the ability to lean on experience and a history of doing this stuff.
Well, you bring up your wife. She's got to be Wonder Woman because three kids, three daughters, and you've got two businesses up and down the East Coast, and of course, oh yeah, not to mention the Yankees and your podcast and all your writing. And how do you put it all together? Like, what's your pie chart
Yeah.
looking like in terms of how much of a wedge is family, how much is the Yankees, how much
Yeah.
is Cressy performance in
Yeah.
Massachusetts versus Florida? What's your life like?
Yeah. The first thing I would say is it doesn't blend together. That's always my goal, is be where your feet are at. Like, like if I'm here in my office and I'm trying to do Yankees call while the gym is bumping and my daughter's hanging out in my office and the dog wants to go out, like, there's just too many layers, right? So I think the secret to managing a lot of responsibilities is always to compartmentalize your life and to batch things. So like when I sit down to write programs, I don't want to write one program. I want to write 6 or 7 because I know I'm in that mode. When I'm recording a podcast, I want to be all in on that. I'm very fortunate that the responsibilities for the Yankees and the facility, they kind of offset each other with the calendar year. November is actually my busiest month. People are surprised at that when they hear it, but the season obviously wraps up in October, and it's getting all those guys started on off-season programs. It's making sure they're synced up there. We do a lot in the free agent medical space, particularly at that point, minor league free agents and major league free agents are a little bit thereafter. The gym is bumping. There's always like holiday stuff. There's a ton of like seminars going on at that time in the baseball off season. Winter meetings is early December. So it's just like every pro guy who wants to get married has their bachelor party and their wedding between mid-November and mid-January. There's like, you take out Christmas and Thanksgiving, you've kind of like, you got like 6 weekends they all fight over for stuff. So you just know what your calendar is going to be. My wife is an absolute saint. She is like a organizational rock star. She's the glue that holds this facility together across all of our offerings. So
I think I married her sister.
Yeah, there you go. So that's what it takes behind every great man is a much, much greater female usually. So that's something that I've been fortunate to have with, there's challenges of working with your wife as well.
Sure.
But, to have 3 kids under 10, doing all the things they do, I have quite a bit of travel. We've got a 14-year-old dog that's not always super compliant to everything that we need as well. But, she's a star, but, it's always about scale. It's like, are you a good teacher? Are you a good organizer? Are you someone that understands how to invest in employees? So I can do what I do because I have great people. To be honest, I'm not super involved in our Massachusetts facility anymore. My business partner, Pete, and our director of performance, John, they do an amazing job, kind of steps aside from that, to a large degree financially. And I said, guys, like, keep my name, what I built, and, obviously like make it amazing. Like I trust you guys to do it. I'm here as a resource, I'll help out where needed. If you want me to do, Zoom calls for the staff, you want me to handle tough cases, make introductions to orthopedic surgeons for someone who needs a surgery, whatever it is. And then we're there for, for 6 weeks in the summertime, but I trust those guys to be stars. And I think that's some of the problem is like nowadays, you see people who fail in this industry because they empower people that haven't been prepared or aren't ready for it. But at the same time, you can hold your business back by not empowering someone that's wildly capable. I made the mistake of micromanaging, I think, a little bit too much early in my career. So I'm very, very big on trusting people that I've invested in and that I believe are capable. And, you give them the opportunity to fail without consequences. I talk about failing forward. And I think it's served me well across, a number of disciplines over the years.
That's fantastic. Yeah. I can see I've made a couple of those mistakes in the past for sure. So, but I'll chalk it up to experience at the same time because I learned something from it. Okay. So
tuition to the world of entrepreneurship, right?
There it is. Okay. What about just kind of putting your services and your products in the limelight here? Do you have any for trainers, for therapists, for baseball specialists, and so on? What do you have to offer everybody?
Yeah, for sure. I think the one that's kind of become known as a little bit of a flagship product in that space in particular would be my my Sturdy Shoulder Solutions course. That was something that came out a couple of years ago and it's kind of stood the test of time. But it builds on some of the work Mike Reinhold and I did and some of our products with functional stability training and optimal shoulder performance, but kind of a more accurate representation of maybe where I'm at with a lot of our shoulder stuff. So it has things that'll be good for trainers. It'll have good things for for physical therapists as well. Another one that I think a lot of people would like, I have a medicine ball training masterclass. I think a lot of people have kind of come to know us for a lot of our med ball work. And that's just a course. It's a 2-hour course I did with Athletes Acceleration that I think delivers a lot of things that matter for athletic populations, rehabbing low backs, hitting coaches, everything imaginable. So those are the ones that maybe in the context of this discussion would probably apply the most.
Great. Okay, and I'll be sure to put in links to your website and your podcast as well. How often do you do your podcast?
We basically do 10 episode seasons. So I generally shoot for about 40 episodes a year. So for all intents and purposes, it's generally weekly.
All right, beautiful.
Yeah.
Then I'll put the links there too. Kind of like you say, the tide rises all boats. So hopefully things will keep rising. And I can't thank you enough for coming on and putting a little time aside, and that's a rare commodity in your life. So I appreciate you very much.
My pleasure, man. Thanks so much for having me. Enjoyed catching up.
Well, that's one more episode in the books. I want to thank Eric for coming on, as well as the New York Yankees organization for allowing this to take place. Remember, you can go to my website, rockysnyder.com, for continuing education, whether you're a chiropractor, athletic trainer, physical therapist, strength coach, or personal trainer. Maybe join me November 3rd for posture-based soft tissue mobilization. You can get more information on the website. Remember, you can also go to setantacollege.com, enter RS10 for 10% off your tuition for your master's program today. Check out my book, Return to Center. Follow me on Instagram at Rocky_Snyder, and we'll see you next week.